gentlemen, with your kind attention and permission, I have the honor of presenting to you one of the most remarkable men in the world. How remarkable? He's swift.
Hello. My name is Fritz KO, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Fritz KO Vids.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Hello and welcome. In this video series, I have been looking at the origins of Rh-negative blood. And that has taken my YouTube channel on a journey from Sumeria to Egypt, to South America, looking for legends of red-haired giants, referred to in the Bible as the Nephilim, and Anunnaki by the Sumerians. They may have built all the megalithic structures of old on Earth, and these giants may have been Rh-negative. In the last two parts, we are shifting our attention back to Sumeria. In recent years, scientists have been testing the DNA of the remains of people from ancient Sumeria. What they found is quite baffling. They found Indian DNA in the oldest of the remains. For many years, people have wondered where the Sumerians came from. And now finally the mystery has been solved. But now a new mystery remains. Is India the cradle/birthplace of mankind? Let's take a look at India and her ancient culture, myths of mystical gods and giants, and also legends of flying UFO-type craft. If we are ever to understand the origins of our Rh-negative blood type, India may hold the key to unlocking that question's answer. I actually interviewed a person who knows a lot more about India than myself, but the recording on his end is not that great at first. And I do apologize for that. The recording does get better after a bit. And the conversation is one not to miss. So sit back, relax, hit the like button and subscribe. Join the Rh-negative blood origin forum on Facebook. Hit the notification bell next to the subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching.
Hello, my name is Fritz KO, and welcome back to my YouTube channel show, Factual Conspiracy. Tonight's guest is Ray Dennis Davis, and we have an interesting topic prepared for you guys. Topic for conversation is India. Welcome to the show, Ray. It's good to have you back. We had attempted a show in the past, and unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties on my end, that show was lost. I do want to apologize to you and thank you for returning.
Not a problem. It's always good to be here. And thank you for having me on your show.
Oh man, dude, I really do appreciate your time. All right.
Cool.
So you have an extensive background in India, in the culture, in ancient traditions, and ancient folklore, and different stuff like Hamanas and the ancient Sanskrits, and different lores and whatnot. And we had talked previously in the past. You said a lot of this started from your own personal research, and I'll just let you take over from there a little bit, where you found out a lot of the information that you have.
Well, when I was a kid, my father, he used to take me to the local library, and yeah, I used to take out books on pretty much everything and anything. I would read everything from like encyclopedias to Judy Blume to astronomy. Yeah, it really didn't matter. But then as time went on, I started to get into other, more esoteric stuff. I used to divide my reading between, I would read like, a light book, and then, something a little bit heavier. I'd have a book on physics, and, I'd have the esoteric stuff. And after that, those were subjects, let's start with like ghosts, Bigfoot, that type of thing. But I got a couple of like really good books when I was a kid, and the one that really sticks out in my mind was called something to the effect of Mysteries of Forgotten World, I think it was. And I think that was by Charles Berlitz, who did the Bermuda Triangle. So I remember I read his Bermuda Triangle first and being very impressed with that. But the Mysteries of, Forgotten Past, or whatever that book was, I really like that, because in there he kind of talks about a new theory, a new idea, which was something, I had never really thought of. And I think the majority of people even now wouldn't think of, is that, if you went back to the beginning of civilization as we know it, which is roughly 10 to 15,000 years as far as, we've been able to determine from Mesopotamia to Göbekli Tepe, that's roughly a pretty, conservative estimate. But that's one that I think most people agree on, 10,000 to 15,000 years. Well, if that's the case, going back to Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon and all that, that's like 100,000 years. And in his book, by the end of the book, he kind of theorizes and puts forth his theory that, if it took us 10,000 years to go from Mesopotamia, Göbekli Tepe, all the way till now, and the atom bomb, that's plenty of time for about 3, maybe even 4 civilizations to have come up, developed an atom bomb or something like that, exploded, destroyed themselves, and the rest, there'd be tens, maybe 20, 30,000 years in between for stuff to erode, metal, as we know it, all the iron and everything. That kind of erodes after about 500 to definitely 1,000 years. So all the skyscrapers and things like that we see today, if you gave people like even 2,000, 3,000 years, the majority, 90% of it would be gone. So it was a mind-blowing hypothesis for me as a kid, and thinking like, wow, like, I could see that, they have all these oops artifacts, like out of place artifacts that show up, and they don't seem to make much sense, but yet they're there, like they'll find a cog, someplace, like totally out of whack, that should not be there, and it's within the strata of the earth where it just should not be, and it's a cog, it looks like a screw, it has the makings of a screw, but yet there's no machine for it to fit in, and it shouldn't be a machine for it to fit in, but yet it's there. And so, going back to that, yeah, that's how I got into that. And then right around the same time I got a little bit older, I was a teenager, and I started to read about linguistics and things like that. And, there's always kind of been an argument with India and, Arabic and Indian mathematics, like which kind of came first. The majority of the algebra and stuff that we use tends to come from Arabia, but basically Arabia is just not that far from the Indus Valley and into India, and so India itself never really kind of gets the credit for mathematics as well as linguistics, as the majority of the linguistics we tend to, have come from Sumeria and Mesopotamia. So it's got kind of like a very Eurocentric idea of like everything came from Mesopotamia, like, there's probably diffusion that comes from India and the Indus Valley over to Arabia, which is the Middle East.
I mean, it is a known fact that before Roman times and Greek times, that Middle Eastern cultures possessed a higher knowledge of medicine than Europeans, especially during the Dark Ages.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'm thinking by that time, you have Alexander the Great. He had already come and rolled through and had made it to India, but there, you really didn't have anyone else, of any real consequence that really traveled that route until maybe, Marco Polo's time after the Dark Ages, I guess. It's amazing. Like you have the Black Plague and all that going on in, Europe and everything. Decimates 3/4 or whatever of people that were there. But yet in India, they had Ayurvedic, which is natural healing. Now, of course, they're very lucky in that, they have places and things like persimmon, I think turmeric is called. They use that in the majority, it's like a curry type. So they were kind of blessed with some natural ingredients that really kind of only occur there. But it is pretty amazing that, they had this natural healing art like way back then, along with yoga and some of the other things. And it's very interesting now that, India as a country is finally starting to be recognized or noticed universally. I just think that's very interesting. And as a country, it's probably the last real mysterious country that people don't know all that much about, as it is. I mean, it used to be maybe China, but China has broken down and opened up a lot of its doors to Western culture. And I think only now people are starting to pick up on, India and the Indian culture as we see it now.
And I think maybe you should probably explain a little bit of their class structure there in India too, that has existed for thousands of years, as far as my knowledge is.
Yeah. In India, they have what's called a caste system, which is like basically the way it's broken down is that whatever you're born into, that's what you are. Like, in America, most of the other countries, you're able to rise up out of your caste system, i.e., like if you work hard enough, you can make something of yourself. You can start a business if you want, for the most part. You can get a job. You can go to university. In India, and I'm generalizing. I'm not saying that this is always the case, but from what I've read and seen, it is. The caste systems, if you're born poor, you're pretty much poor. You're not going to get a shot. You would have to win an actual literal lottery to leave the country, to pursue other options. I mean, and that's really what holds India back, as far, in my mind, as being a world power. It's just amazing. Like you read that and you're just like, oh, it's such a shame because they have these millions of people there, all of them extremely smart, just about, and just I'm always just really kind of flabbergasted that they're not more of a world power.
I would totally agree, and I would also like to say not just the medicine, but their capability for literature and storing their literature that they have preserved for just like their caste system for thousands of years, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that really makes India very divisive, if probably not the most divisive country, is its diversity of religions. If you look at India, every major religion is in India. Just about. Like they have Catholic, they have, Christian, Catholic, Jewish, they have, Muslim. There's a large Muslim percentage there, as well as Hindu, as well as Buddhist. And they just, as of right now, they're not able to make that work to their advantage. Instead, it seems to be like a major dividing point where, I guess because they're it's lived in that caste system so long it has somehow spread into the cultural idea of the religions themselves. So, like, Hindus don't mix with, Buddhists. And actually, I think you would think that the Muslim and the Catholics would battle with each other over there, but it isn't. From everything I've read, it seems to be mostly Hindu and Muslims battling it out with one another there. They also have what are called Sikhs, which is, a whole nother, the Babs. The Babism is also there. So you've got like about 7, maybe 8 major religions that we know of all in one spot. Nobody's working together as a team, so there's no cohesive unity at all. Now, when you get into literature, like you were saying, go back to that, you could literally be an expert on Indian literature and nothing else because it's so vast. And there's Indian literature that, is within the culture, but you could also be an expert on religious literature because that is just, amazing. They have knowledge of cosmology, Indian cosmology that starts at Planck time, where there's like nothing, right after the Big Bang, all the way up. They literally have it planned out. I mean, a person could really be an expert just on Indian religious literature, Hindu.
Nice. And one thing that was really interesting to me when we're talking about literature when it comes to them is that they have touched on lots of different interesting aspects that I touch on in my show throughout, their history when they talk about things that have happened in the past. One thing in particular, they comment on flying aircraft at one period in time. And these vehicles are called Hamanas, I believe. I may be pronouncing them incorrectly.
Brahmanas. And it's basically, I think that story is like a battle between two gods. I don't remember if it's Krishna or whoever, but they have a battle, and it just basically sounds very much like, a battle between airplanes or stealth fighters. And, they give descriptions, and I find this interesting too, that I think the descriptions, if I remember correctly, talk about a Mercury-driven engine, which is interesting now because when I hear about, some of the modern UFO things, the triangular ones, for whatever reason, I think some of the descriptions of them have a Mercury-driven engine in them as well.
And it's very interesting that you bring that up because the Nazi scientist or German scientists that created the first jet propulsion engine, they asked him at one point in time, someone did, a reporter or whatnot, asked him where he got the idea to create the engine. And he said, from reading ancient Indian texts. And, as it's portrayed in the Indiana Jones movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Nazis were kind of engaging in that type of activity. They were scouring Africa and all over the place. There's stories of them being in Antarctica. And so it makes you wonder what kind of knowledge, the Nazis did possess at the end before, Germany was pretty much destroyed and their museums looted by Russians and Americans and everyone else, you know what I mean? A lot of knowledge has probably fell through the cracks and disappeared forever that they had recollected.
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff is all kind of connected, like you were saying. Yeah, I have no doubt that they definitely, at the very least, went to India. They had people sent there. They wanted to prove that there was a connection between the linguistic style of writing and, their, Germanic, Teutonic, style of writing. They really wanted to shy away from any idea that writing as we know it came from the Middle East. At the same time, they were sending people, a group of people to Norway or someplace as well, and we're trying to find the base of the Germanic language, a Teutonic language that came from there. As they really wanted to prove that there was a Nazi supergroup that they came from, Supermen.
It's almost hard to believe too, because all the, like you're saying, all the places they were also in Tibet. I mean,
Right.
all the ancient, like quote unquote, cradle birthplaces of ancient civilizations, they pretty much touched and explored. And it's really weird too that after they went to Antarctica and Admiral Byrd launched an expedition to see if there was any Nazis there, that there's a moratorium on that. As far as I know, no one is allowed to go to Antarctica. You can go to the North Pole, but you can't go to Antarctica.
Yeah, right. You know, like there's that too. Like you have to be a trained scientist in order to go there. You need a special pass, I think. Although it is amazing that they do have like an ATM down there for them to use. I believe it's the only one on Antarctica. Which is interesting because, well, apparently, like when the scientists are down there, you know, there is places inside where they have to eat and everything. But you know, that's very interesting too. But yeah, getting back to, you know, Germany and what they were doing, I have no doubt, you know, like that's what we've been told. You know, I'm sure that they were doing other things besides that. Like you were saying, they were definitely interested, like in the Indiana Jones and where they were looking for, you know, mystical, you know, anything. They definitely looked.
I think that's definitely a cover story, like almost to the fact of like they were just looking for, I'm thinking, for ancient knowledge so they could possess it for themselves. Because one of the first things Hitler did when he crossed over into Austria was he went to the museum and he took the Spear of Destiny.
That's right.
And so I think their main concern was technology, and we could tell that was a fact. I mean, just based upon how German technology always has been. You know, I mean, if you want a good car, you buy a German car. You know what I mean? You buy a BMW, you buy a Mercedes. Long story short, Volkswagen is a pretty decent car too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pretty decently made automobile. And when the scientist said that he was reading ancient Indian scripts, I just think back to the story that we were talking about of the gods and the aerial battles, and them I'm thinking he was reading some stuff like that. And I've heard other stories also, like not just that one in particular, of texts from India where they said that some kings or princes or something may have had some flying technology. Have you heard anything that fits in with that?
Yeah, I don't have any doubt that, you know, whatever technology they did find there or were able to build, the feeling I kind of get is like it was the end of the war, from what I've read about the Glocka, which is the time travel device, the
Nazi,
you know, UFO, right, the Nazi one. I have no doubt that they were probably working on that towards the end of the war. I don't think, this is my own personal feeling, I don't think they created it fully yet. Like, I almost get the sense like the Americans or whoever were able to storm in and shut it down. And anything that was there was like quickly taken out and brought to us.
One thing that the SS did was the SS came in and killed somewhere near 200 scientists that were working on that project before it was either the Russians or us. I believe it was the Russians. They came in there, you know, and they wanted to protect all that information once they realized that Russia and the United States was snatching up scientists and, you know, not to send them to prison. I mean, in Operation Paperclip alone, we brought 2,000 German scientists to America, one of them being Wernher von Braun, who was actually, you know, father of NASA, our spaceflight program, NASA. You know, he's the father of that program. He created the V-12 rockets that were used on England by Germany during World War II. And it's pretty much the same racket.
Who's the other guy? There was von Neumann or something, I think.
Oh man, there's a whole bunch of Vons. You know what I mean? Luther von Vandenberg. No, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of different German scientists, over 2,000 different ones, and there was ones. You know, they were specific in different types of categories in fields that they specialized in. And like, you know, for example, von Braun was specialized in rockets, you know, and propulsion systems and things of that nature. And there's other guys that specialized in MK Ultra type things and all kinds of different other this, that, and the other in betweens, you know, etc. On and so forth. But pretty much what it was a lot of different controversial things for the most part. That's why, you know, it wasn't something that was expressed to the government or to the public publicly by the government that we were bringing, you know, that many different Nazi scientists, some of them war criminals, you know, here, and paying for their lives and their existences, and funding their further research and their technology developments, but for our benefit.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I'm just about positive, like whatever it was that they were working on, they probably scarfed it right out of there and shut it down, and everything else killed whoever was there. Because this is all like what we're hearing, and I have no doubt, like we hear probably at the most 20% of what happens in any given situation that our government deals in. Probably closer to 10, 9%.
Yeah, you know, an ancient theorist said about 200 years ago, all you got to do is look to figure out who is controlling you in any given society in any given time period, is look who you're not allowed to question. And those are the people that are responsible for your slavery.
Right, exactly. Yeah, very interesting stuff, but getting back to India and the connection between the Glocka and that, I have no doubt that, and you're going to hear this a lot, like I've been noticing in the news, they've dug up recently, I think, in two different spots, actually. They were like two rulers. One was in Mexico and the other ruler was in China. And it was both of them were underground tombs, and wherever the ruler was, he was up on top of something, and there was like a round circular pool of mercury. So, and it was these two different places that historically weren't aware of one another, didn't talk to one another allegedly, although there might have been diffusion from, China to Mexico, but, I don't know if the two were connected in this case. There's definitely, I believe the ancients, they knew the abilities of Mercury and, probably knew that it had some kind of tie-in with time travel or faster than light speed or, I'm not quite sure how it works. Maybe it opens up a wormhole. But basically, I think the idea is that the Mercury spins around in a circle while they have like magnets go around Mercury, and somehow or other it makes whatever's inside of that or around it able to be lighter than air or, travel faster than the speed of light.
That's what I've heard too. That's exactly what I've heard too, is the theory proposed that there's mercury that spins and somehow magnets are involved in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I've actually been in contact with some people on Yahoo News and stuff that one guy claimed that, he worked for, one of the air, Northrop Grumman or something like that out there. And he was saying very similar that we have at least two, possibly three of those types of machines that we made that we made ourselves after reverse engineering crashed UFOs over the years.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that too, because I was always under the premise that a lot of these UFO sightings didn't really happen till after World War II, once these Nazi scientists had been actually brought here to our country. And, people like to talk about the Glocka and lots of different other things, and it's kind of a fact that they had them. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it just means that once we brought all the Nazi scientists here, that we then have UFO technology then at that point. And that's why people were seeing them. That's why Roswell happened. You know what I mean? It was probably one of the first ones and was crashed. You know what I mean? The first American built type aircraft, if whatever you want to call it, I guess, you know. But another thing before we moved on too far, and I'm sure you probably want to come back to what I just said, but when we talk about the Mercury and stuff, I can't help but think about alchemists in the Middle Ages. We've talked about the Middle Ages just briefly here, you know, and made a connection there before. Do you think there's anything involved there a little bit that's been hidden from us? Like they say they're trying to find an elixir of life. I'm not sure if that's 100% true when they were ingesting chemicals. You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny you mention that because, yeah, I do think that there is some kind of basis to alchemy. I really do. That, either has been forgotten, or, maybe there's certain groups that still know about it. But if you think about it, all of the elements that we have here on Earth, which is essentially carbon-based, and I'm talking, everything from like iron, zinc, all these things that are like the hard, heavy elements to the lighter, elements. All those things come from the stars, basically. Everything that we have on our Earth came from two stars specifically that circled around one another billions of years ago. Billions of years later went supernova. Those two exploded. Because that's the only type of heat that can create those types of elements. It has to be two stars. They have to live to a certain point and explode together. So then it took, billions of years for all those elements to shoot out into space while our Earth was forming further out. Eventually, all those elements and pieces, landed on our forming Earth millions of years ago. Then it took millions of years for it to sink into Earth. And then, another million years for it to come up far enough. And to form and harden for us to find it, millions of years from that. So you're talking about, basically all these things that these alchemists were mixing together, and you had one source that it came from, a star. So is it possible to transmutate one form into another? And in theory, yeah. Do we have the ability to? Do we have the means to? Sometimes yes, other times no. That's not to say that some of these guys knew secret ways to transmutate one element into another. Yeah, I don't have any doubt. And the number one, of course, like you were saying, that they were trying to transmutate was gold. So again, like if you'd have to really think, like if our whole banking system, and I hate to jump from one conspiracy idea to another, but a lot of them are kind of connected.
No, that's fine. That's what we do on this show.
Connected to gold. So if everybody had gold, it's like after that it would be worthless if we all had it.
It's very true.
And our dollar's based on it and everything. So, if that got out that, hey, you can just create gold in your kitchen sink, what would happen?
Yeah, really. We'd all be millionaires, but just for a second, it'd be like king for a day, and then gold wouldn't be worth nothing by tomorrow.
Right, exactly. But yeah, getting back to what you were saying about the alchemists and the elements, yeah, I think it's very possible and probable that they were at the very least onto something there. And you're talking about guys like Isaac Newton was an alchemist. I mean, the guy came up with gravity along with other inventions that, you read about him on Wikipedia or if you get a book on him, probably the most intelligent guy for at least 500 years. The only guy I can think of that rivaled him was Da Vinci, and I would only put Da Vinci first because he was more diverse. But, yeah, I mean, all these guys had that ability. So, I mean, if you got a guy like Newton working on that with, secret knowledge or whatever he has at his fingertips, who knows? I'm sure maybe he did know some things or other people did. There's a couple accounts that have appeared throughout history that, nobody really knows who they are. There's the one with like Saint Germain. And then there was another guy around the turn of this past century that, he knew all kinds of secrets. He had spoke with the U.S. government. He appeared like around World War II, and then he like disappeared again. Nobody talked to him. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, another thing that is so interesting to me about this whole topic, especially what we're just now discussing, is the fact that, okay, so they knew how to spin mercury. And when you think about stuff like the Baghdad battery, you know, the possibility that ancient Egyptians had lights in pyramids, you know, and they had scrolled pictures on temple walls depicting what looks like light bulbs and wires and electricity. You know what I mean? And so if they had, at different periods of time, way before the Middle Ages, that knowledge that you could spin mercury and you could make magnets and spin the magnets and create some kind of propulsion engine out of that, what all did they know? I mean, to possess that knowledge, they were definitely more, if that is the fact, if that is accurate, they would be then more technically advanced, I would be guessing, than we are now, or are gonna be for a while. And it's a different type of system too. Like most of our engines and things are combustion based upon gas. It doesn't seem like they had that type of technology at all. You know what I mean? Like, we're something totally different. Our culture, what it's based upon, our societies.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, and when I think of it, when I look at like the Baghdad battery and everything, it's a fairly recent, although it's older than we, they're given credit for, obviously, because it's an oops artifact. But I have no doubt that they had that. If you look at the Egyptian tombs, almost always they never see, they don't ever see torch marks on the ceiling from fires. You have to wonder, all right, how are these guys, digging down there? How are they creating these structures with no light? And they've tried to use the mirror to mirror thing, and eventually the light disperses over time, as we know. So it only went so far, like from, outside sunlight working in the daytime. So after that, you're wondering, okay, where did the illumination to work on this stuff come from? And, the Baghdad battery, I have no doubt. Now, if you go back far farther than that,
you know what scientists will say? They'll say they use mirrors.
When you get back towards the beginning of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, I don't have any doubt that they had a different. I'll put it this way: I think they were more advanced than us, or at least as advanced, but with a different type of science and technology than we have. I think theirs was very earth-based, and they had machines that worked off of the earth somehow that we don't quite understand, or we didn't develop it. We developed in a different way,
Yeah,
somehow
with the
that earth-based knowledge got lost.
Sound like it
and
produces
occasionally you'll get a guy like Nikola Tesla or somebody like that picked up on, hey, the earth emits sound waves, and we can use sound waves to spread electricity. And, he had the tower Tesla did. And so I think, again, those things are connected. I think, the Egyptians and people before them already had machines or some type of thing that, worked off of that.
Well, you're absolutely right, man. When you talk about Tesla with the Wardenclyffe and J.P. Morgan not backing that project anymore once he realized he was going to provide people with free electricity. And the mercury and the magnets, as long as you didn't have a machine that spit out a little bit of mercury here and there, like our two-stroke engine stroke motors do in the two-stroke motors do when you're out in the lake, then it probably would be a pretty clean source of energy. You know what I mean? As far as no pollutants, is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you look back on that, and I have no doubt that these guys, previous generations and previous peoples had those, similar types of things. And it gets forgotten, or it gets buried, or a group of people that have it are no longer around and just got forgotten. And it takes a guy like Tesla or some other genius to rediscover it again. There's also a guy who created the Coral Castle down in Florida. And again, like, I hate to sound like I'm jumping from one conspiracy thing to another, but I'm not trying to say, I don't think they're connected. I think that science and people rediscover the same things is the point I'm trying to make. And yeah, I think these people knew it back then, and every once in a while you'll have somebody today that rediscovers it. And this guy, I think his name was Edward something, he created the Coral Castle, and he said that he knew how to, smooth blocks the way the ancient Egyptians did, and he did it by himself.
And they still haven't figured out how he's moved those blocks today, because he was moving some blocks up to 2,000 pounds with like joke equipment, stuff he should not have been able to be moving.
Right, right, exactly. And when you look at it, like, he was a guy, I think he was like 120 pounds or something.
He was not a massive dude, and he was pretty, he wasn't a young guy either. Not to say he was ancient or anything, but he was not a young guy. He was not extremely physically fit by no means, per se. He was an average gentleman, I'm guessing, in his 50s. And yeah, he was able to lift some extremely large and extremely heavy blocks, and people today still cannot figure out and recreate exactly what he did there.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody saw him working on it. He was alone. So again, you have to wonder, like, even if you had a pulley system, again, you still need somebody to move the block if you're pulling the pulley,
That's very true. And at the same time, each time you hook up another pulley, in all fairness and due respects to pulleys, each time you do hook up another pulley, it does take off a small portion. And with enough pulleys, you can almost lift anything if you do it right,
Right, exactly. And I have my own theories with the Great Pyramid. And again, they might have done a lot of different ways, but now in that case, you had the manpower. Like, if you wanted to put a pulley on the top of a pyramid and then have a giant block at the bottom, you had tons of literal counterweight in people. You could have people come up, stand on the platform until it just slowly raised the block where you needed it. But again, that doesn't solve or fix the problem of how did they get the blocks from where they got them from, which were like 40 some miles away.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless it was like a Henry Houdini type thing where he moved the stuff in a way where people never saw his equipment. That's possible.
Right.
Something we have to take into consideration. I'm not saying that's what happened, because that's the thing. After a certain period of time, all you are left with is what people say. Like when people always say that to you, like, it's not possible that these things we're talking about could exist, because there'd be some remnant of UFOs if they existed in India and whatnot. Well, let's think about that hypothetically. If there was, say, 2,000 to 5,000 years ago, some ancient civilization that possessed this technology. Obviously, it doesn't exist today, so it must have collapsed at some point. And when it did, the whole society as a whole collapsed, and everything around it probably collapsed. They lost food production, everything, for whatever reason, natural disaster, war, who knows, all hypothetical. But when societies break down, especially in olden days, they destroy everything. I mean, it wouldn't have been a matter of time. I mean, and if you lose a significant portion of the population, yeah, you all know how to fly. We all know how to drive cars, right? Say we lost 70% of the population. No more manufacturing, no more shipping, no receiving. Eventually, I mean, people know how to drive a car, and they know how to fix a car. But do they know how to manufacture a car from scratch in a processing plant? You know what I mean? I mean, there's a lot that goes into any complicated machine that if a society crumbles, you're no longer able to make these things. So it wouldn't be too long, I'm assuming, before they would be melting down these things to make simple implements like spears and swords to go kill each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I have no doubt that these guys were able, again, I think the type of technology, as you put it, that they had was probably very Earth-centric. Like, I'm sure that there's energy in the Earth that we're not able to tap somehow. And I think whatever things that they used to bring them out, they were things. They weren't necessarily machines as, or they weren't machines as we need them. They're not carbon-based. They're not using the combustion engine. And people have to understand everything that we live, all the air and everything we breathe, is based essentially on carbon. Carbon, its reaction with helium and oxygen. And I think, previous generations, thousands of years ago had things or machines or, stone blocks that were able to tap into an energy that we just didn't use basically for the most part and just got forgotten. I mean, we have dozens of, unknown civilizations where we come across it, but we have no Rosetta Stone to break it down basically. So there's a language there, but we don't have a Rosetta Stone to figure it out.
And it's the same thing with the Mayan culture. And in that same respect, when we come across a lot of these ancient cultures, we find that we have actually been lost to a significant portion of knowledge. Like for the Mayans example, by the time it took them to actually be able to decode that particular language as best they could, because actually during the Spanish conquest of South America, the Catholic religion actually had destroyed a lot of that stuff, saying it represented Satanism. So that's almost why that language was lost forever, because of the Catholic Church, long story short. But anyway, we found out they had a calendar that actually, the way they chronicalized days and months and yada yada, and that is actually more advanced than any calendar used by anyone currently. So, I mean, it's a fact.
Right, again, the Mayan calendar, and I think the Hindu calendar as well, the Indian calendar there, both are more exact than what we have at the moment.
Yeah, and I also wonder too, because when I think about India and ancient civilizations, there's also, in southern, I believe it's west coast, southern Africa, there are some temples of these ancient culture that goes back to around Egyptian times, where they have their square towers built inverted into the ground, where it's hollowed out around them. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? And they are also Christians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when you look at a lot of that stuff, like there might have been a diffusion from one place to the other. But again, the big question is, and again, it goes back to that Eurocentric idea, like where's the diffusion coming from? Like kind of like who had it first. And they, almost always, like I said, we're very Middle Eastern, Mesopotamia centric, I could call it. And I think, again, they want to say, okay, Sumeria, Babylon, kind of the first civilization, but that's not really true. You have at least two, and actually three other civilizations that were going on simultaneously. They just found a new one in South America somewhere, just only a handful of months ago. That the civilization, to equal of or as old as Sumeria when that was developing into Babylon and such.
It's the same
but
thing
you
with
also
finding,
have India and China developing around the same time, out of the prehistoric period.
It's also the same thing. They find new species every year too. And like the FBI says, every year there's 100 to 200 new serial killers at large. So as the species go extinct too, you know what I mean? Every year they're finding new species. Every year they're finding new species that are extinct now, that don't exist. And in a way, even though a lot of this is due to pollution and overgrowth of our civilizations and populations, and not appropriately taking care of our environments, a lot of times we find that certain animals thrive and overcome and evolve just like we do. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And it was very interesting stuff. And the way I see things, I think a lot of it probably did come from India to a large degree and diffused away from there. If you look at where people evolved, it's predominantly Kenya and Ethiopia. Those are the oldest pieces of bone that we find, that comes from humanity as we know it. But what's interesting is that if you look at Kenya and Ethiopia, it's on the east coast of Africa, right next to, the Indian Ocean. And this is, again, it's all ties in, you have stories of Mu and Atlantis and everything. I have no doubt that there's probably older bones further out in the Indian Ocean, like groups, that are even older, thousands of years. So we have stuff like that. We have no idea. There could have been, a different landmass that was raised and got lowered that people came from that are even older, or maybe, who knows, there could have been 5 different versions of people on an island out there. The island sank and then they spread out, and you had from there Chinese, India, European, and, African. But, who knows? I mean, that's one of those things you'll have to wait and ask God when you die. I don't know.
I understand.
But
Yeah.
but
And
it does
one
make
thing I
sense. Like,
wanted,
you look at the Pangea and the idea of you could literally take the continents and stick them together like a giant puzzle, and they would fit perfectly. And that's without taking into account, like, raised and lowered land masses that have happened over thousands of years.
that's the $1 million question. When they were together, were we kicking around like we are now? It
Right.
really
And if
is.
we were, what were we? Who were we?
Well, they
again,
found big carvings, sculptures of human faces in the sides of mountains in Africa, and they don't look like Africans. They almost look like Indians or, Caucasians, and it's interesting. You know what I mean? Just like the ancient Egyptians, the rulers, at least the depictions of them, they look like, somewhat, at least Indians or Caucasians. They don't look like African Americans. And I've heard some scientists talk about that there's hominids on most continents. You know what I mean? Which is weird too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very interesting, like, and I'm sure you've read or heard of it too, like South America, they had stories of, bearded white people that came there, thousands of years, and that's what led to the Aztec and Mayan empires to, Aztec and Incan empires to, eventually get destroyed, because they had this myth, the story of a returning bearded, red-haired god.
I've heard that before too, and they also said at times when they've needed people, a bearded Caucasian fellow would come and help them. You know what I mean, and show them how to build boats and do different things.
Yeah, and not only did it say that he was bearded, that he would have red hair and everything. Like, they picked the year, and they had like the date or something. I think it might even been the literal day that they were going to come, and that's when they did arrive. So